Gawain, the Knight of the Sun, the Maiden's Knight, an enthusiastic member of Arthuria's fan club. But what about the Gawain of Fate Grand Order? How well does he compare to his mythical counterpart? And what grade would I give his depiction? Let's find out, shall we? Gawain is a saber-class servant, which is another one of those no-brainer choices. Pretty much no matter what, Gawain is wielding a sword. He was even said to have wielded Excalibur at times. Later on, he would have his own unique sword provided by the Lady of the Lake, Galut, later renamed to Galatine. Suffice to say, saber fits Gawain perfectly. Getting into his character design, Gawain very much looks the part of a knight, armored in full plate, carrying a massive sword. He gets a cape in his second ascension, then takes off his chest piece and gets an even bigger cape for his third. Best seen in his first ascension are the flowers that decorate his chest armor, an allusion to Gawain being known as the Maiden's Knight, a champion and defender of ladies, something that happens quite often in legends about him, notably stories that involve a castle of maidens that is under siege by some villain. Then Gawain comes in to lift the siege and rescue the ladies. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Though he is renowned for his courtesy, one look at Gawain is really all you need to know that this is a guy you do not want to mess with, even during summer events. Gawain is among the best of King Arthur's knights, and his fate design certainly looks the part. It's a straightforward design, but effective. Moving into his skill set, Gawain's first skill is Numeral of the Saint, Gawain's unique buff that makes him more powerful during 2 3-hour periods of the day, from 9 AM to noon, and from 3 PM to 6 PM. During those hours, Gawain's strength triples, making him a formidable opponent for anyone, even Lancelot. Now you may have noticed something here. 2 3-hour windows of time where Gawain's strength triples? Well, the number 3 is said to be a sacred number in Celtic mythology, and comes up in other places as well, such as Christianity's Holy Trinity. This is where the name Numeral of the Saint comes from. In the earliest legends, Gawain didn't have this, but it was added later on and is now a core part of Gawain's legend. Gawain's second skill is Charisma, which becomes Knightless Charisma after an upgrade. Charisma is a generic skill we've seen many times before, usually meant to represent a person's talent for leadership. In Gawain's case, though, this is actually meant to represent his personality. Gawain was famed for his courtesy, a champion of maidens and friend to all who come to Camelot. Simply being on the same side as Gawain is enough to give a little boost to allies, and so he gets this skill, albeit at rank E. As for the upgrade Knightless Charisma, this relates directly to his role in the Camelot Singularity, where the gift he was given was called Knightless, to have the sun always shining whenever Gawain drew his sword. Since we already know that Gawain gets a massive buff when the sun shines, the gift that allowed him to bring out the sun at will is a key part of what made Gawain such a deadly opponent in the Camelot Singularity. Lastly, Gawain's third skill is Belt of Bertilac, a sash Gawain acquired during the story Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This story is one of the most famous from Arthurian legend, occurring when Gawain was still a young knight yet to have officially become part of the Round Table. Here we go. One day, a knight dressed in green carrying an axe and riding a green horse arrived at Camelot. He dares the knights to strike one blow against him with his axe, and that, if they promise to take a similar blow from him a year and a day later, he will give that knight his axe. Gawain takes up the challenge, using the knight's axe to chop off his head, only for the Green Knight to pick up his head, put it back on, and say that he will be seeing Gawain again a year and a day from now. Since Gawain doesn't have the ability to reattach his own head, he resigns himself to the fact that he is going to die when that day arrives. Shortly before the appointed day, he heads out to the Green Knight's chapel, stopping by a nearby castle. The castle's lord allows him to stay for the 3 remaining days, making a deal with Gawain that he will give him the results of the day's hunting trips as food if, in exchange, Gawain gives the lord whatever he might have received during the day. The lord brings back animals killed in his hunts, and Gawain gives the lord kisses in exchange, because the lord's wife keeps trying to seduce Gawain, but he restricts it to only those kisses. On the 3rd and last day, Gawain ends up accepting 3 kisses and a green sash, which the lady claims will protect him from physical harm, something that could prove rather useful since he's scheduled to get his head chopped off the next day. That night, Gawain returns the 3 kisses he had received from the castle's lady, but does not tell the lord about the sash. The next day, Gawain sets out for the chapel and meets the Green Knight, then bares his neck for the knight's axe. After 2 false starts, the Green Knight cuts into Gawain's neck a little, then reveals the truth. The Green Knight is, in fact, the castle's lord, Bertilac de Haut-Desert. By coming out to his certain death, Gawain had proved his honor. but the little cut he did receive was for having not told Bertilac about the sash Gawain had received the day before. This whole episode, including the bit where this guy apparently reattached his own head, was all the work of illusion magic by Morgan Le Fay, meant to test the resolve of King Arthur's knights, and to scare the crap out of Guinevere by having her watch a guy reattach his own head. Glad to be alive but ashamed about having not handed over the sash, Gawain resolves to wear this green sash as a reminder of his one failing, soon inspiring other Round Table knights to do the same. This sash is the belt of Bertilac this skill's name refers to. Now, did I need to tell this whole story just to talk about this one skill? Well, no, but I was going to tell this story sometime in this video anyway, and this seemed like as good a time as any.
この剣は太陽の内にあらゆる不浄を清める焔の影のエクスカリバー・ガラティーン!
Gawain's noble phantasm is Excalibur Galatine, whereupon he tosses his sword into the air, the blade returns to him empowered by the sun's fire, and then he unleashes that fire upon his foes. Galatine is Gawain's sword, one given by the Lady of the Lake, making it one of 3 fairy-blessed swords in Arthurian legend: Excalibur, Galatine, and Erendite. It is said that Galatine is a sister sword to Excalibur, and in earlier legends Gawain even wielded Excalibur itself. That's how we get the name Excalibur Galatine. As for the imagery, I've already talked about Gawain's connection to the sun, how his power triples when it shines brightest in the sky. This MP simply takes that one step further, by depicting Gawain wielding the flames of the sun itself. Gawain's craft essence is Grangolet, Gawain's warhorse from the legends. This horse was originally called Cain Khaled in the Welsh legends, which later changed to Grangolet in the French stories. The C's text is written from the horse's perspective, telling of his rider Gawain, how he is a muscled warrior who is difficult to carry, a driven and honorable man, but also how he can be stubborn and relentless. I wonder if Grangolet would get along with red hair. Anyway, as silly as the C's text is by having this different perspective, as well as having Grangolet keep forgetting what Gawain's name is, the link to Gawain's lore is quite clear. The only nitpick I have is that, in the text, it says Grangolet is now a fey horse. I'm not sure why that is, but that's what it says. Gawain's Valentine C is Your Skin's Best Friend, featuring a box full of skincare products. It's an interesting gift for sure, and very likely an allusion to Gawain's reputation as a champion of maidens, chivalrously in Welsh and English legends, less so in the French ones. This gift hits differently if you play as Godako like I do, though he passes it off as being something he might give to his younger sister, Gareth. Anyway, this is a nice little allusion to Gawain's reputation. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends surrounding Gawain. Of the various characters in Arthurian legend, Gawain is one of the oldest, first appearing in the original Welsh oral traditions. His original version was named Gwalchmai, and he has gone through many names and evolutions since, far too many for me to list here. However, Gawain is in a bit of a strange place, because depending upon the author, his character can be quite different. In Welsh and English stories, Gawain is the ideal knight, courteous, chivalrous, pious, and a superb warrior. But in French tales, Gawain becomes irreligious, a womanizer, and unforgiving. There are even some stories that portray him as a villain, notably the prose Tristan from the 13th century, the first story to link Tristan to Arthurian legend. When Malory created his unified narrative in Le Morte d'Arthur, his portrayal of Gawain blends these varied interpretations together, creating a supremely skilled knight who is renowned for his courtesy, but who also has some very human flaws. I'm going to stick to Malory for this video, as I've done in my other videos on characters in Arthurian legend. Gawain is the son of King Lot of Orkney and his wife Morgause, the half-sister to King Arthur, making Gawain a nephew to both King Arthur and Morgan Le Fay. Gawain is the eldest of 5 brothers, the Orkney brothers, all of whom would become notable figures in Arthurian legend: Gawain himself, Agravain, Gaheris, Gareth, and Mordred. Fun family. King Lot would become one of the kings who challenged King Arthur's legitimacy, fighting against him, but after acquiring the sword Excalibur, King Arthur won a decisive victory, with almost all of his enemies, including King Lot, being killed in the battle. The first time we meet Gawain is at the funeral for the kings who fell in the battle. It was King Arthur's ally, King Pellinore, who killed King Lot, and though Gawain would soon become one of the first of King Arthur's Round Table knights, he and his brother Gaheris quietly swore revenge against King Pellinore for killing their father. A few years later, Gawain would kill King Pellinore, but that would only be the first death in this blood feud. In the time between his arrival at Camelot and becoming a full Knight of the Round Table, Gawain would have his encounter with the Green Knight, the story I discussed when talking about his third skill. Gawain would quickly rise to be among the best of the Round Table knights, first distinguishing himself in that weird side story where King Arthur conquers the Roman Empire. Only a handful of knights can stand up to Gawain in combat, and his only superior is Lancelot. While this might inspire jealousy in some, Gawain and Lancelot instead became close friends. As I mentioned before, he also became known as a champion of ladies or maidens in distress, though in Malory this actually began due to a tragedy. At one point early on, Gawain, swinging his sword at a foe, accidentally killed a lady instead. After that, Gawain resolved to be a champion for ladies and maidens everywhere to make up for that mistake. Gawain was noted for his courtesy to new arrivals at Camelot, even those who seemed insignificant. About 15 years after he joined the Round Table, a young man arrived asking to stay and work in the castle's kitchens for a year, then to be able to ask for 2 other favors once that year had passed. Most of the knights in the court were indifferent at best, or demeaning at worst, particularly Sir Kay, who foisted difficult tasks upon this new servant and mockingly gave him the nickname Bouma, or Beautiful Hands. Gawain and Lancelot were the only 2 knights who treated the newcomer with any courtesy, offering him better lodgings, which the servant politely declined. Later on, to the pleasant surprise of Gawain and the humiliation of Sir Kay, this kitchen servant would turn out to be more than he seemed at first glance, someone Gawain had last seen as a small child, his younger brother, Gareth. Despite being a knight of great renown, Gawain had his flaws, particularly his tendency to pursue grudges. At a joust, Gawain and all of his siblings would be humiliated by Sir Lamorak, one of King Pelinor's sons. This rekindled old anger, which was aggravated when Gawain's brother Gaheris found Sir Lamorak in bed with their mother Morgause. Gaheris promptly murders Morgause, but leaves Sir Lamorak alone for the moment. Not long after, 4 of the 5 Orkney brothers would gang up on and murder Sir Lamorak. Only Gareth refused to take part. Gawain and Agravain also almost killed their brother Gaheris once they learned that he had killed their mother, but they were talked down by Gareth and Bors to let this blood feud end. Many years later, another son of King Pellinor would become a Knight of the Round Table, Percival. But despite the fact that he had murdered his father and played a part in the murder of his brother, Gawain and Percival seem to have gotten along pretty well. It probably helped that Percival never knew his father or brother, having been taken to the wilderness by his mother. Gawain's flaws would play a big part in why he would not succeed at the Grail quest. He was actually the first Round Table Knight to declare his intent to pursue the Grail, inspiring the others to follow suit. But Gawain's pursuit of that blood feud, combined with him not being particularly religious, ensured that he would not succeed. I should note that the Welsh and English Gawain is noted for being very pious, but this was stripped out of his French version, and Malory's Gawain did not get that back. After the Grail quest, though, Agravain and Mordred became fixated upon exposing Lancelot's affair with Guinevere. Gawain and the other Orkney brothers wanted no part of that, but 2 of Gawain's sons would join Agravain and Mordred's efforts. When they did catch Lancelot, Agravain, Gawain's 2 sons, and 9 other knights were killed. Mordred only barely escaped with his life. Despite losing a brother and 2 of his sons, Gawain spoke against King Arthur's reluctant decision to sentence Guinevere to death, wishing that the whole matter would just be dropped. I guess Gawain thought that his sons had made their own choices, and nobody really liked Agravain anyway. When it was time for Guinevere's sentence to be carried out, Gawain refused to be present, and his 2 brothers Gaheris and Gareth only attended reluctantly, refusing to wear any armor. But when Lancelot charged in to rescue Guinevere, he went on a rampage, killing at least 24 Round Table knights, including both Gaheris and Gareth. While Gawain might have been able to accept the deaths of his sons and Agravain, the death of 2 more siblings, particularly Gareth, that was too much. Gawain's unforgiving nature reared its head once more, now fixated upon his former friend Lancelot. King Arthur was still inclined to forgive Lancelot, but Gawain pushed the king to march against Lancelot's castle in France. A series of battles followed, but then Gawain sought to take matters into his own hands, challenging Lancelot to a duel. Lancelot didn't accept at first, but after repeated taunts and seeing other knights be defeated by Gawain, he eventually accepted. The duel began at 9 a.m., just as Gawain's strength tripled from his blessing. For the next 3 hours, he attacked. Lancelot had beaten Gawain before in many tournaments, but for these 3 hours, Gawain was far more dangerous, with Lancelot only barely managing to hold him off. But once the 3 hours were up, Gawain's strength weakened, and Lancelot was able to defeat him. Gawain asked Lancelot to kill him, but he refused. A few weeks later, Gawain had recovered and challenged Lancelot again, but again Lancelot managed to hold out for 3 frenzied hours, then gave Gawain a head wound. But before Gawain could recover and challenge Lancelot a 3rd time, news of Mordred's revolt reached them. The war with Lancelot was now on hold, as King Arthur and the still wounded Gawain rushed back to Britain. As King Arthur's armies landed in Britain at Dover, he was met by Mordred's army, with Gawain and Mordred engaging in a duel. Had Gawain been at his best, he almost certainly would have killed Mordred. Instead, the already wounded Gawain took another blow to the head, in the same place Lancelot had wounded him, turning his injury into a fatal one. On his deathbed, he wrote a letter, begging Lancelot for forgiveness and to return to Britain with all haste, that the king needed Lancelot for the final battle against Mordred. Shortly after finishing the letter, Gawain died, with his body being buried at Dover's castle. Up to the 15th century, it was said that visitors to Dover Castle could see Gawain's damaged skull, though it has since been lost. His letter reached Lancelot, and he rushed back to Britain, but Lancelot arrived too late for the Battle of Camelot, meeting only Guinevere and Bedivere mourning the fallen king. Gawain's first appearance in the Fate franchise was in the 2010 PSP game Fate Extra, where he is the servant of Leonardo B. Harvey, the character we see on the craft essences Ideal Holy King and Holy King of Twilight. Leonardo and Gawain are the final pair that Hakuno Kishinami must face before reaching the Grail, and prove to be the most difficult opponents yet. Leonardo is a guy who basically was raised from birth to become a leader, being a scion of the richest family on Earth, and in the Extraverse one that controls 60% of the world's wealth? How? I have questions, but that's not important right now. The point is, Leo was raised to be the ruler of Earth, and so has acquired a detached, almost kingly disposition, one that sounds curiously similar to Arturia herself. Gawain would serve Leo loyally, fighting on his side until the end. Why? Because Fate's Gawain has regrets over how his story ended. He blames himself for pushing the feud against Lancelot. Why he did so is understandable. Lancelot had killed 3 of Gawain's brothers and 2 of his sons. But since Gawain's pursuit of Lancelot gave Mordred the opportunity to revolt, and kept Lancelot away from King Arthur at the moment he was needed most, Gawain sees himself as being responsible for the fall of Camelot. Because of that, the servant Gawain's wish is to make up for that, to be of service to a king again, to prove his honor and loyalty. This is why he stood by Leo in Fate Extra. The boy had a kingly disposition and was being prepared to rule. Leo wasn't King Arthur, but he was close enough to a king that Gawain served him loyally. But Gawain's true loyalty still lies with the true King Arthur. In Fate EXTELLA, Gawain has a little side story where he is fighting some servants invading Nero's realm, only to catch a glimpse of Arturia herself. After a few more battles, including one against his king, he gets an opportunity to talk to her. Gawain expresses his wish to her, to be of service to a king, to make up for how he had failed her in life. Since he had failed Arturia in life, and then served a different king in the person of Leo, Gawain offered up his own life to Arturia. She, of course, rejected this, praising Gawain's dedication and stating that, even if he is currently serving another, Gawain will always be a knight of King Arthur. It's a nice and heartwarming moment, but, as we know, the Extraverse is a separate world from the one of Fate Grand Order. When we get to Gawain in Fate Grand Order, his wish to be of service to a king is as earnest as ever, but now gets deconstructed. Summoned by the Lion King in the Camelot Singularity, Gawain finds himself serving a very different Arturia, a goddess trying to preserve the memory of the most pure examples of humanity, and to dispose of the rest. Half of the Round Table Knights refuse to go along with this, and so get killed by the other half. Others survive this exchange, but are unable to accept the cruel methods of the Lion King. Tristan has his entire personality reversed. Lancelot tries to save who he can behind the Lion King's back, and Gareth chooses to sacrifice herself to bring down Richard the Lionheart. For his part, Gawain sticks to his loyalty. He made his commitment to be the knight that he feels he failed to be in life, and now that he has the blood of civilians and other Round Table Knights on his hands, Gawain feels that he can no longer go back. It's made clear that he hates what he's doing, but he cannot turn his back on his king. This is why, when he is finally defeated, Gawain expresses resentment towards Bedivere, saying that had Bedivere arrived in Camelot sooner, perhaps he might have been able to restore the king's humanity, and so perhaps the worst atrocities in the Camelot Singularity might not have happened. When Gawain is summoned to Chaldea, though, he gets to be more like his true self, the courteous, honorable knight who will fight with everything he has. His other notable story appearance is in the main interlude, Seraph, which takes place during the Epic of Remnant chapters. He is the first of Chaldea's servants that the protagonist reunites with, though Gawain isn't one of the servants the protagonist came to Seraphix with, having race-shifted with Nero, Tamamo, and Emiya, but ended up with Gawain, Tamamo Cat, and Emiya Alter. In addition to being the steadfast ally he usually is, Gawain also shows his reputation as a rescuer of maidens. While Gawain does express his interest in Passionlip for her huge tracts of land, and how he can now pursue other women since his marriage hasn't carried over into his life as a servant, Gawain's efforts to rescue Passionlip are consistent with his reputation. He is made out to be a little perverted, but I'm willing to forgive that. This is a story with Sessioin Chiara as its main villain after all. Speaking of her, shortly after rescuing Passionlip, the party returns to the church, only for Gawain to get murdered in the middle of the night by Sessioin Chiara. On a side note, I made a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail when talking about Passionlip, and for a knight that is such a big part of Arthurian legend, Gawain gets absolutely shafted in that movie. His name only comes up as being one of the casualties of the Killer Rabbit. Gawain does have a few event appearances, usually together with the other Round Table knights. He is one of the Aloha Knights in Summer 4, guarding Casino Camelot and the final swimsuit swordmaster, the Summer Lion King. Since the Round Table Knights had Arturia dress up in that bunny outfit, I would like to remind you that Arturia is Gawain's aunt. Lastly, Gawain pops up now and then in other events, where it is mentioned that he cooked food for the Round Table Knights, though he is noted as being a pretty bad cook, likely being the reason why Arturia has become such a food fanatic since becoming a servant. We don't really have anything about Gawain doing cooking in Arthurian legend, but one nitpick? Gawain is particularly noted for potatoes, which comes up not only in this scene from Saber Wars 2, but also Gawain's interlude, where he punishes Mordred by putting her on a diet of potatoes for an entire month. This is anachronistic though, since potatoes are native to the Americas, and so only came to Europe after much of Arthurian legend had already been written, never mind when it was set to take place. On another note, Caesar makes an appearance in Gawain's interlude, where he acts as a shady debt collector. I'll have to remember this as an example when I do my accuracy video on Caesar. Just a normal review, I totally didn't just give away how I feel about him. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Gawain's depiction in Fate Grand Order in the wider Fate franchise? Well, his character design is excellent, directly referencing Gawain's most famous strengths in Arthurian legend. His buff when the sun shines, his agreeable personality, and then the sash from the Green Knight story. His MP is excellent too. Really, the only thing I can dig at is that they say his horse is now a Fey horse in his Bond CE. As for characterization, it's superb, with Gawain closely matching Mallory's version of the character. His motivations to serve as a loyal knight because he feels that he failed to do so makes perfect sense. He was regretful at the end of his life, begging Lancelot to return with that letter from his deathbed, and Gawain's nature to remind himself of his own flaws also comes across clearly in the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's some great writing, depicting Gawain as the good knight in Fate Extra, Fate EXTELLA, and for much of Fate Grand Order, but then deconstructing that in the Camelot Singularity, showing how his desire to be a loyal knight pushes him to commit evil deeds. The only thing wrong with Gawain's depiction is that he cooks potatoes, since Europeans didn't discover potatoes until 1537. But the potatoes and the Fey horse thing are so unimportant that bringing these up as his biggest flaws only further reinforces the point. Gawain's design and characterization are excellent, consistent with his legends, and make him among the best depicted characters in all of the Fate franchise. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Gawain, the Knight of the Sun, an A+, a grade reserved only for the best of the best. Gawain is the first servant to officially receive this grade, the 50th servant I've given a grade to. Well, Charlotte Corday would have also gotten an A+, but my video on her was before I started giving grades. So, officially, Gawain is the first. Hooray! If you would like to learn more about Gawain's Lost Belt counterpart, check out my video on Barghest here. Until next time.